Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gift of Health Weekly Wellness Chat. We are so excited to be with you. Today, we have a very, very special guest. For those of you joining for the first time, I'm Dr. Arjun Rayapudi, and this is my lovely wife, Dr. Shobha Rayapudi. We are both board certified lifestyle medicine doctors and co-founders of Gift of Health, where we're showing people how to prevent and reverse disease and get off medications and lose weight and keep it off by using plant-based nutrition and active healthy lifestyles. As a part of our weekly wellness chat, we are bringing experts in plant-based nutrition and lifestyle medicine uh, every few weeks. And today we have a very, very special guest. We are so honored to introduce Brenda Davis, who actually needs not much of introduction.
You're right. Today's special guest doesn't need much introduction, but those of you who are meeting her for the very first time, like Brenda Davis is a registered dietitian, and she is an acclaimed international speaker as well. Like one thing that's really interesting and I love is she's actually referred to as godmother of plant-based dietitians by Veg News. And she is, I know she's an acclaimed speaker, but she has spoken in many conferences in over 20 countries, like just spanning on 5 continents. And she is an author of 12 books. Her most recent book, Nourish, it actually also won a 2020 Nautilus Book Award. And it was also a Canada Book Award winner. So we are so glad. And she, like in 2007, she was actually inducted into the Vegetarian Hall of Fame. And no doubt she has a very busy professional career, but she is also a grandmother to her 2 cute little grandchildren, about being mother to 2 grown children. So we are so excited to have her. And I know like we can go on and on about her, but like we are really excited to have her. And it's really such an honor. And thank you so much, Brenda, for carving this time. We know like despite being inundated with so many things that you're here today, and we are really honored to have you here.
Well, I'm very honored to be with you as well, and so grateful for what you're doing and excited to be with the group that you have following you. So thank you so much, everyone who's here, for being here.
Brenda, so we have Judy saying hello. She's actually joining from BC, and she's close to Kelowna.
Wow.
Yeah, there is Gail saying hi, Shirley saying hi. Hi, Sadie. Great. Let us know if the audio and video are good. Just give a thumbs up or a like. Today, Brenda is going to be discussing a very, very important topic. I would say it's one of the most burning topics in the whole world of nutrition, like this paleo and keto diets. And Brenda will be deconstructing the paleo and keto diets, and we are looking forward to seeing all the questions from you, and she'll be taking us through I'll just have Brenda take over and do her deconstruction of the paleo and keto diets, and then we can take the discussion from there.
Yes, and I'll be happy to take questions after my presentation. And thanks again for having me and for being here, everyone. So let's see if I can get it up. I think we've got it up.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it looks beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. So yes, I'm going to be talking about deconstructing keto and paleo diets. And I just have to say, it's so interesting when you think about plant-based versus keto versus paleo. They all feature different macronutrients. A plant-based diet is largely carbohydrate. The main macronutrient is carbohydrate. In a keto diet, it's mainly fat, and in a paleo diet, it's mainly protein, or, it's the highest protein of all the diets that people would consume. And these diets, I would say these 3 diets are among the most popular right now. And so I'm a plant-based dietitian. I've been plant-based for over 30 years. And so I remember when keto and paleo started to become a big deal, I decided I needed to learn as much as I could about them so I could help people to know why or why not they are reasonable to be following. So I'll start with a very brief outline. So what we're going to be talking about is, first we'll define keto and paleo diets. We'll talk about the features that distinguish the keto from the paleo diet. Then we'll talk about some of the claims of the keto and paleo movements and the evidence or lack thereof of those claims. Then we'll compare plant-based versus low-carb diets in general. Both of these diets are low-carb, with keto being much lower than paleo. And then we'll finish up by talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of low-carb diets. So I'm just going to move myself over to another screen. So there. So I want to begin by talking about what is a ketogenic diet. And a ketogenic diet is essentially a diet that generates something called ketones. And so keto equals ketones and genic equals generate. And so ketogenic, it creates a metabolic state called ketosis. And all ketosis really is elevated ketones in the blood and the urine. So what are ketones? Well, ketones are acids made by the liver from fatty acids that you consume. Small amounts are constantly being produced as an energy source for the body. So it's not like they shouldn't be in our bloodstream. They're always in our bloodstream. But production ramps up a lot when you're deprived of carbohydrates, because carbohydrates provide the glucose, and that's our main energy source. And when we don't have it, we have to rely on something else. So, it's very important to know that ketones cannot be used by all cells in the body. So only about 50% of your basal energy needs and 70% of your brain's energy needs can actually be met by ketones, because there are some cells in the body that can't use ketones. They have to use glucose for energy. And red blood cells are among them. They don't have any mitochondria, and you have to have mitochondria to use ketones. And liver cells lack a necessary enzyme called beta-ketoacyl-CoA transferase that it needs to use ketones as well. So these cannot, the red blood cells and the liver cells, these cells cannot use ketones. They have to use glucose. So what triggers ketosis? Why would people go into ketosis? Well, uncontrolled diabetes can trigger it. In people with type 1 diabetes, especially, ketosis can occur when they have insufficient insulin. And it can cause a very severe form of ketosis, a potentially life-threatening condition called ketoacidosis. And this ketoacidosis is very rare in people that don't have type 1 diabetes. It's not impossible, but it's very rare. The second thing that can cause ketosis is starvation or fasting. When you have no access to food, your body draws upon, number one, its carbohydrate stores, and it uses up these stores. And basically, carbohydrates are stored in the form of glycogen in our body, and mainly in the liver. And the glycogen is converted to glucose, so we can use that up. And then once that is pretty much gone, we move over to the protein stores, and protein from muscle is used to make glucose via something called gluconeogenesis, which means, basically the production of glucose. And then we move on to our fat stores. And glycerol from triglycerides is used to make glucose via gluconeogenesis, and fatty acids are used to make ketones when triglycerides are broken down. So triglycerides are essentially a glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acids, and it is those fatty acids that are used to make ketones. So number 3 is ketogenic or keto diets. And so what is a ketogenic or keto diet? Well, it's basically an eating plan that forces the body to shift from using glucose to using its, which is its preferred fuel, to using its emergency backup fuel called ketones as its primary fuel. And it's a way really of tricking your body into thinking it's fasting. The diet is extremely low in carbohydrates. It's very high in fat, and it's low to moderate in terms of its protein content. The basic premise of the diet is that when we are in ketosis, we shift to more of a fat burning metabolism, and weight loss becomes effortless and disease risk is dramatically reduced. So that's the premise, and that's sort of the theory of why people who want to lose weight or reduce disease risk should go on a ketogenic diet. So what do the macronutrients in a ketogenic diet look like? Well, a classic ketogenic diet, which has been traditionally used for the treatment of epilepsy, is 90% fat, 6 to 8% protein, and only 2 to 4% carbohydrates. Now, a weight loss ketogenic diet is less extreme. But it's the most extreme of the low carb diets. It's about 70 to 80% of calories from fat, 15 to 20% protein, and 5 to 10% of calories from carbohydrates. And so what foods are actually permitted on a ketogenic diet? Well, it's basically, you can see the keto pyramid here, and you can see at the base of the pyramid, meat, poultry, fish, eggs, cheese, some dairy products, the low carb dairy products like cheese and butter. And then of course, all the fats and oils and the green vegetables, some non-starchy vegetables, nuts and seeds and berries are included in the diet. Now, what's not permitted is sort of, the grains, fluid milk, which has carbohydrates, beans, any of corn, any of the really high carbohydrate foods. Starchy vegetables are excluded as well. And the basic, sort of slogan would be eat fat, eat meat, poultry, eggs, and fish. The fattier, the better. Eat non-starchy vegetables. So that kind of sums up the diet in a nutshell. Here's a sample recipe I got from a ketogenic a keto website, and it's called Cheesy Taco Casserole. You can see 3 pounds of ground beef, 2 cups of pepper jack cheese, 4 cups of Colby and jack cheese, and 2 cups of frozen pepper strips. And so we're looking at, for 1/8 of the recipe, about almost 800 calories, 61 grams of fat, about 70% of the calories, 30 grams of saturated fat, 7 grams of carbohydrate, which is very little, 49 grams of protein, which is a lot, and only 0.5 gram of fiber. So that kind of sums up the ketogenic or the keto diet. So what is a paleo diet? Well, a paleo diet is a pattern of eating that attempts to mimic the diet of our Paleolithic ancestors. And the basic premise of this diet is a shift from our hunting and gathering diet, which was rich in wild meat and wild plants, to an agricultural diet rich in grains and legumes, gave rise to our obesity and chronic disease epidemics. So that's the sort of theory. Paleo macronutrients is really a less extreme low carb diet. So it's about 50% fat of calories from fat, 30% of calories from protein, and 20% of calories from carbohydrates. So what foods are permitted? Well, you can see their pyramid. The base of the pyramid is meat, then fruits and vegetables and nuts and berries at the top. And the paleo diet does not include grains, legumes, or dairy products. And the theme for the paleo diet is, if a caveman couldn't eat it, neither should you. And here's a sample recipe. So you can see it's got coconut oil, pork tenderloin, minced garlic and ginger, green beans, snap peas, red pepper flakes, carrots, coconut milk, sesame seeds, and of course pork tenderloin is the star of the show. Now, what you can see here is there are a lot more vegetables, so it's a little more vegetable heavy, but it's also really high in fat and meat as well. And so half of the recipe, about 643 calories, 53% of calories from fat, 16 grams of saturated fat, 54 grams of protein, so it's even higher in protein, a little higher in carbohydrates, about 15% of calories or 24 grams of carbs. And it's got a lot more fiber, 8 grams of fiber, because because it's got a lot of vegetables. So let's compare the paleo and the keto diets. In the blue, you see the similarities. In the red, you'll see the differences. So first, in terms of meat, poultry, and fish, paleo diet is very high in these foods, and a keto diet is also high. So they're very similar that way. Nuts and seeds are included in both programs. Green vegetables are included, legumes are excluded, and grains are excluded. Now for the differences. In terms of dairy, in the paleo diet, dairy is completely excluded. In the keto, very high fat, low carb dairy is very strongly encouraged. So it's very high in cheese, for example. Other non-starchy vegetables are included in paleo, but more limited in keto. And starchy vegetables are limited in paleo, but completely excluded in keto. Fruits are moderate in paleo and they're minimized in keto. Some fruits are permitted, but fairly small amounts. And concentrated fats and oils are moderate in the paleo diet, and they're very high in the keto diet. And so again, if you look at the macronutrients, 70 to 80% of the calories in a keto diet are fat, whereas it's only about 50% in the paleo diet. And carbohydrate restriction in keto diets, it's less than 5 to 10% of calories. Other low carbohydrate diets are around 11 to 40% of calories from carbohydrates. And of course, as we mentioned, paleo is around 20%, so somewhere in between. How many grams of carbohydrates on a 2,000 calorie diet? Well, for keto, it's about 25 to 50 grams, and for paleo, it's about 100 grams. Now, the average percent of calories from carbohydrates in common foods, I think it's interesting for you to see this, because remember that only 5 to 10% of calories come from carbs in a ketogenic diet, and about 20% in a paleo diet. Well, fruits and starchy vegetables are 90+% of calories from carbohydrates. Grains and legumes are 70 to 75% of calories from carbohydrates. Even non-starchy vegetables are almost 60% of calories from carbohydrates on average. Milk, 2% milk is about 37% of calories from carbohydrates. Nuts and seeds around 12%. So they're the only plant food that's under around 55, 60%. Eggs and cheese are about 3%. And of course, meat, poultry, fish, fats and oils are zero. There are no carbohydrates in these foods. And if you think about this, I think it's really important to recognize that the most nutrient-dense, phytochemical, antioxidant, prebiotic, probiotic rich foods are fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes. And these foods are predominantly carbohydrates. So it's just important to recognize that. So there's something that you might come across in this sort of keto paleo worlds, and that's called net carbohydrates. And so people who are on very low carbohydrate diets generally count net carbs rather than total carbs. This essentially, what it does is subtract fiber from total carbohydrates, because fiber is not digested. So net carbs equal total carbs minus fiber. Using net carbs actually means that more total carbohydrates can be consumed on low carbohydrate diets. So remember, typical keto limit is 25 to 50 grams of carbohydrates, and paleo about 100 grams. So you can see here, these are non-starchy vegetables. Well, a cup of eggplant has about 17 grams of total carbohydrates, but the net carbohydrates are only 12 grams, because there's about 5 grams of fiber in a cup of eggplant. So you can see asparagus, 6 grams total carbohydrates, 4 grams net. Cucumbers, 3 total, 2 net. So you're basically minusing 1 for the fiber. Kale has only 1 gram of carbohydrate in a cup. And the net carb is only 0.2 grams, because it's got quite a bit of fiber. So you can see using net carbs allows for greater consumption, especially of things like leafy greens. Now, if you look at the carbohydrate content of other foods, and remember that sort of 25 to 50 gram limit in a ketogenic diet, you can quickly see why grains and legumes and fruits and these higher carbohydrate foods are either very limited or excluded completely from the diet. So for example, a cup of quinoa or a medium baked potato or a cup of chickpeas, close to 40 grams of carbohydrates, but around 30 to 34 of net carbohydrates. Even a cup of blueberries, you're looking at 21 grams of carbohydrates. Net carbohydrate is 17 grams. So it's not like you can eat a huge amount of blueberries on a ketogenic diet because the numbers add up pretty quickly. Now, by contrast, if you look at sour cream and cheese, you're looking at 1 gram of net carbohydrates. So which is more healthful, a keto diet or a paleo diet? Well, keto is the most extreme of all the low carb diets. Fatty foods predominate. Plant foods are very heavily restricted. Paleo is a less extreme low carbohydrate diet, and it definitely allows for more liberal intake of plant foods. So I would say generally paleo is a better choice than keto. It has higher levels of protective nutrients like fiber and prebiotics and phytochemicals and antioxidants and plant sterols and all of those things. So now let's move on to digging a little deeper with these two diets. So first, let's look at the keto diets. And the keto claims, there are many. We'll look at, I think, 3 of them. The claims are that they're the best diets for weight loss, they reverse type 2 diabetes, and they kill cancer. So those are the 3 we'll look at today. So number 1, weight loss. Well, we've got a fair bit of research on this, but most of the research is fairly short term, between 3 weeks and 4 months. And reports, these reports, these sort of short-term reports do show significant weight loss with ketogenic diets. They show favorable changes in body composition and markers of inflammation and effective appetite suppression. In the research that is 6 months to 1 year, so still fairly short term, but a little longer than the other studies, we actually have a 2020 meta-analysis of 38 randomized controlled trials with around 6,500 participants. Over half of the studies were ketogenic diets with 10% or fewer of the calories from carbohydrates. The balance were low carbohydrate diets with less than 40% of calories from carbohydrates. Keto and low carb diets led to about a 1.3 kilogram or 2.9 pound greater weight loss than diets containing less than 30% fat. And they led to favorable changes in triglycerides and HDL cholesterol, but unfavorable changes in LDL and total cholesterol. So for the longer term research, 1 year or more, we have a meta-analysis of 13 randomized controlled trials. They showed slightly more weight loss, about 2 pounds more over a year on keto versus a low-fat diet. And the low-fat diet was defined as less than 30% fat. And a lot of people would argue that's not very low fat, but that's what they counted as low fat. And it was lower in triglycerides, higher in, it lowered triglycerides and raised, they had lower triglycerides and higher HDL cholesterol levels on the keto versus the low fat, higher LDL, and no significant differences in blood pressure, fasting glucose, insulin, HbA1c, or C-reactive protein. The weight loss was similar to the low fat over 2 years, however. Now, this study is really interesting. This is a 2016 metabolic ward trial. And if you're not familiar with a metabolic ward trial, it's basically a trial where people are kind of in a little prison. They're in a hospital and they have no access to food other than what is being provided for them. So it's a very well-controlled kind of program. And they compared a baseline diet with 50% of calories from carbohydrate with an isocaloric keto diet, which means a diet that had the same number of calories, which was only 5% carbohydrate, in 17 overweight men. And in a 4-week crossover design, 4 weeks on the baseline diet and then 4 weeks on the ketogenic diet, the loss of fat-free mass or muscle was greater on the keto diet than it was on the 50% carbohydrate diet. It took 4 weeks on the keto diet to lose 0.5 kilograms of fat and only 2 weeks on the baseline diet. So that was interesting. Now, another metabolic ward trial, which I think was even more interesting, same group of researchers, they actually compared a low-fat plant-based diet with only about 10% fat and 75% carbohydrates with a ketogenic diet that was the exact opposite, 10% of calories from carbohydrates and 70% of calories from fat. It was a 2-week crossover design with unrestricted food intake. The ketogenic diet lowered blood glucose, insulin, and triglycerides, but it impaired glucose tolerance and an increased loss of muscle tissue. So those are two things that are not good. We don't want to impair glucose tolerance. That basically increases insulin resistance, and we don't want to lose muscle tissue. Now, in the plant-based diet, we saw lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, and lower energy intakes, which I found quite fascinating. People who could eat as much as they want ate 689 calories less a day on the plant-based diet than on the ketogenic diet. And I think it's because of the amount of fiber and the satiety that comes with a high fiber plant-based diet. But the plant-based diet also, they saw greater fat loss. They lost an average of 51 grams of fat a day on the plant-based diet versus only 16 grams a day on the ketogenic diet. The verdict, ketogenic diets do induce weight loss, but they may be less effective than very low fat plant-based diets. And there are lots of ways to lose weight. Anything that promotes an energy deficit will promote weight loss. It doesn't mean it's good for you. And this is a commercial from the 1920s: to keep a slender figure, no one can deny, reach for a cigarette. And that was promoted as a weight loss means. And I don't think, even though it does, smoking can induce weight loss, it's probably not a very good way to do so. And what's really interesting is if you look at the US News Best Diet Rankings for 2020, out of 35 diets in the best overall category, keto diets rank 34 out of 35 diets. In the best diets for healthy eating, they rank dead last. Why? Because they're high in total unsaturated fat and high in fatty animal products. They have a great potential for nutritional deficiencies and have multiple unfavorable side effects. The second claim has to do with type 2 diabetes, and there are short-term benefits from keto diets. They produce weight loss, they improve glucose control, they essentially can flatline blood glucose, they reduce A1C, they lower triglycerides, and they can reduce medication use. But the downside is that keto diets help reduce symptoms of diabetes, but they increase insulin resistance. If a person eating a very low carb diet is challenged with a load of carbohydrates, they have very significant spikes in blood glucose because they become even more insulin resistant than they were before they started the ketogenic diet. So why do these diets fail to reverse insulin resistance? Well, they fuel the drivers of insulin resistance: lipotoxicity, inflammation, oxidative stress, and dysbiosis. And lipotoxicity is just when we store fat in places where fat shouldn't be stored, like our liver and our pancreas, our vital organs, and our muscle tissue. And dysbiosis is just an unhealthy gut flora. You can't support a healthy gut microbiota when you don't feed it. You need to feed it prebiotics, and prebiotics are packaged in fiber. And by very definition, low carbohydrate diets are low plant diets, they're low fiber diets. In the long term, we don't have any long-term studies with ketogenic diets, but we do have a systematic review of low-carb studies of over 12 weeks, and there were no differences in weight or A1Cs with longer-term treatment when compared to low-fat diets, low GI diets, or usual care diets, when we're comparing to low-carbohydrate diets. Low-carb diets and type 2 diabetes, we have another study with over 40,000 individuals. It was a health Professionals follow-up study, there were almost 2,700 cases of type 2 diabetes, and low-carb diets, they weren't keto, but they were high in animal protein and animal fat, were associated with a 37% increased risk of type 2 diabetes. Low-carb diets that weren't keto again, but were high in plant-based protein and fat, were not associated with an increased risk, but overall were associated with a 22% decreased risk in men under 65 years of age. The third claim for ketogenic diets is that they will be a good way to prevent and treat cancer. And the theory is that sugar feeds cancer, cancer cells can't use fat, so keto diets cause cancer cell death. And the evidence, we have a lot of small studies, probably only 6 to 32 people per study. And they have reported prolonged or partial remission in cancer, some improvements in quality of life, improved effectiveness of a chemo drug for glioblastoma. But a comprehensive review in 2019 showed that keto diets may slow some cancers if combined with chemo in early stages of the disease, but not all tumors responded positively to keto diets. And studies have really failed to show that keto diets can increase survival in advanced cancer patients. There was a systematic review in 2020 that found beneficial effects on body weight for both over and underweight cancer patients, but 4 out of the 13 studies reported, and 4 out of 13 studies reported beneficial effects on overall survival or progression-free survival. And the conclusion was, in this study, more high-quality studies are needed to determine the strength of the evidence. There was a study in 2019 that looked at low-carb diets and cancer mortality, and they reported that people in the lowest quartile of carbohydrate intake actually had a 36% higher risk of cancer mortality than those in the highest quartile of carbohydrate intake. They also had a 50% higher risk of cardiovascular disease mortality and a 32% increased risk of total mortality. And the conclusion by the authors of this study was that these data provide further evidence that animal-based low carbohydrate diets, which are more prevalent in North American and European populations, should be discouraged. And this is another study from 2019 from Japan that showed that replacing only 3%, and this was, over 70,000 people followed for about 20 years, replacing only 3% of calories from meat with plant protein. And in a 2,000 calorie diet, that'd be about 60 calories. It's not very much. Reduced cancer mortality 42% if you replace red meat with plant protein, and 50% if you replace processed meat with plant protein. So that's really quite shocking. So what do we know about keto? Well, the potential benefits are epileptic seizure reduction, reduced energy intake, reduced appetite suppression, weight loss, low blood sugar, decreased triglycerides, increased HDL cholesterol. The risks in the short term are weakness, fatigue, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, bad breath, muscle cramps, headaches, irritability, poor concentration, stomach pain, difficulty sleeping, and constipation. And risks in the short term, again, are the last were very short term. This is short term. Decreased or increased LDL cholesterol, impaired artery function, impaired glucose tolerance, worsening kidney function, and reduced athletic performance. The risk in the long term, increased all-cause mortality, increased exposure to persistent organic pollutants that move up the food chain, increased risk of birth defects, kidney stones, bone loss, colon cancer, cardiovascular disease, and nutrient deficiencies, and an increased risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and hepatic steatosis. So what about just doing a vegan keto or even a plant-heavy keto. Well, we actually don't have any trials comparing vegan and animal-based keto, but we do have plenty of trials that show that plant-derived fat and protein are protective to health, while animal-derived fat and protein increase disease risk. So vegan keto diets are lower in saturated fat, higher in phytochemicals, antioxidants, fiber, plant sterols, than a regular keto diet. However, lower fat vegan diets beat keto vegan diets on all of these fronts. So now let's dig a little deeper into the paleo diet. So the paleo claims are that paleo diets promote weight loss, reduce hunger, depress sugar cravings, clear skin, increase energy, build muscles, reduce flab, reverse diabetes, reduce inflammation, reduce cancer, and reduce risk of heart disease. And, I think we can agree that if it is a good idea to eat like our short-lived ancestors, and that they were, the first question we would want to ask ourselves is, what did our Paleolithic ancestors actually eat? And what we know is pre-agricultural people ate wild plants, they ate wild animals, they ate fish and insects, and the balance of those foods varied with the time frame during the Paleolithic period, the location, season, gathering and hunting skills, tools, and culture of the particular era. So what didn't people on a Paleolithic diet eat? Well, they didn't eat any packaged foods. There was nothing from a box or a bag. They didn't eat deep fried foods or fast foods. They didn't eat refined fats, oils, sugars, salt. They didn't drink the milk of other mammals or any products made from that milk. They didn't consume processed meats like bacon, ham, salami, lunch meats. They didn't drink alcohol. So the big question that I asked myself when I first started to learn about paleo diets was, do new paleo diets really equal true paleo diets? And so I started to do a little digging into nutritional anthropology, and I found a couple of studies that actually estimated the intakes of paleo, the nutrition intakes of Paleolithic people. And the first was a study from 1997 by Boyd Eaton and Melvin Connor. And then there was another study by the same authors, Melvin Connor and Boyd Eaton, 25 years later, and it came out in 2010. And what they found was early ancestral diets were overwhelmingly plant-based, with some insects and very small amounts of animal flesh. In other words, for the first 80% of the Paleolithic period, humans were essentially largely vegetarian. The reliance on meat increased in later ancestral diets, the last 20% of the Paleolithic period, as hunting skills improved. However, much proof points to continued significant, if not predominant, dependence upon plant foods. So let's take a look at the estimated intakes during the Paleolithic, or that were estimated from these two papers, so the 1997 and the 2010. And so what you see here in this column is the DRI, or the dietary reference intakes. That's how much is recommended for us to be consuming. And here we're looking at macronutrients, so protein, fat, carbohydrates essentially, and fiber as well. But in 1997, they estimated that Paleolithic peoples were eating 45 to 50% of calories from carbohydrate, 20% from fat, and 30% from protein. About 6% saturated fat, an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, polyunsaturated fat of 1 to 1 to 4 to 1, and about 104 grams of fiber a day. And in the revised 2010, they actually increased the range so of the macronutrients, so 25 to 30% protein, 35 to 60% or 65% carbohydrate, 20 to 35% fat, 7.5 to 12% saturated fat, a 2 to 1 ratio of omega 6 to 3, and 70 to 150 grams of carbohydrate. And when you look at this, there's something that, when I looked at it, something that just leapt off the page at me. And that was, oh, and I should say that they were estimating 3,000 calories a day as well. So the thing that leapt off the page at me was fiber. The fiber intake was estimated at, originally 104, and then they went to 70 to 150 plus grams of fiber a day, which is absolutely astonishing, because the average vegan who eats only plant foods probably gets about 40 to 60 grams of fiber a day. So they're getting double what the average vegan gets in Paleolithic times. And that really spoke to me. And then if you look at the intake of micronutrients, there are a few things that pop off the page as well. Vitamin C was 500 to 600 milligrams a day. Calcium was somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 milligrams a day. And potassium was somewhere 7 to 10,000 milligrams a day. And these nutrients, vitamin C is in fruits and vegetables. Calcium, they weren't drinking any cow's milk, so it was from plant foods predominantly, and potassium is largely plant foods as well, or almost exclusively plant foods, in fact. And so these were huge numbers. The average vegan might get 200 or 300 milligrams of vitamin C. They might get 700 or 800 milligrams of calcium. They might get 3,000 or 4,000 milligrams of potassium. So again, they're getting about double what the average vegan gets. And so I said to myself, well, it looks from those numbers like a plant-based diet would be closer to a Paleolithic diet than what people are calling a paleo diet today. So I decided to do the math, and I went to a paleo website, and they had menus and recipes, and I actually did the, calculated the nutrients in their menus, and then, and so you can see what they're eating, a lot of meat, eggs, smoothies, a few nuts and some vegetables. And then I went to, and then I did the same with a recommended plant-based menu. And then I basically adjusted the calories in both menus to 3,000 calories, so we could fairly compare them to the Paleolithic intakes. And so here's what we've got for macronutrients. So you can see they're all 3,000 calories. Protein was definitely closer in this new paleo diet to the true paleo diet than the plant-based diet, which was only 15% of calories from protein. But carbohydrates, fat, and saturated fat were all closer on a plant-based diet to a true paleo diet than they were on what people call paleo diet today. The ratio of 6:3 was closer on the plant-based diet, and the fiber was way closer on the plant-based diet at 70 grams compared to 31 for the new paleo. And then if you look at the vitamins and minerals, well, for riboflavin, thiamine, vitamin C, and E, it was all closer on a plant-based diet, closer to a true paleo diet than on what people call a paleo diet today. Vitamin A was the new paleo is closer to a true paleo. Zinc was closer on a new paleo to a true paleo than the plant-based. And all the other nutrients, iron, calcium, sodium, potassium, were closer on a plant-based diet to a true paleo diet than what people are calling a paleo diet today. So in summary, the paleo diet came closer to a true Paleolithic diet for 3 nutrients: protein, zinc, and vitamin A. And the plant-based diet came closer to the true Paleolithic diet for 13 nutrients: carbohydrate, fat, saturated fat, essential fatty acids, fiber, riboflavin, thiamine, vitamin C, E, iron, calcium, potassium, and sodium. So, does a paleo diet of today really equal a true Paleolithic diet? I don't think so. So why, when you think about it, the diet of our ancestors was wild meat and wild plants, and that's what paleo devotees are trying to do today. But they tend to focus on achieving protein intakes of Paleolithic people, that 30% of calories from protein. So they emphasize meat as opposed to plant foods that would be necessary to achieve the 70 to 150 grams of fiber, the 7,000 plus milligrams of potassium, or the 500 plus milligrams of vitamin C that Paleolithic people ate. And wild meat doesn't equal domestic meat. Meat from wild animals is much lower in fat, about 6 to 16% of calories from fat, compared to about 30 to 60% of calories from fat in farmed animals. And it's lower in saturated fat, higher in omega-3s. It's free of antibiotics and hormones, added hormones, I should say. Wild plants also don't actually equal domestic plants. So cultivated vegetables and fruits have been bred for appearance, palatability, transportability, digestibility, and yield. Wild plants deliver over 3 times the fiber of commercial plants per gram. They're also more concentrated in vitamins, minerals, and protein, and they're lower in sugar. So we do have impressive short-term improvements reported in clinical trials in terms of disease risk. So we see lower body weight, increased satiety, improved lipid profiles, lower blood glucose, better insulin sensitivity, less inflammation, and decreased blood pressure in people consuming paleo diets. Paleo diets, so why the favorable results? Well, paleo diets used in clinical trials reduce foods that are linked to the obesity epidemic and chronic disease. There's no fast foods or fried foods or processed meat or refined grains, refined sugar, concentrated fats and oils, high fat dairy products, alcohol. But are we looking at short-term gain for long-term pain? While paleo diets may induce weight loss and favorable lab results in the short term, there are very significant concerns about adopting such diets in the long term. Paleo diets are high meat diets. The new, what we call paleo diets, are high meat diets. They are high in animal protein, agrochemicals, carnitine, endotoxins, environmental contaminants, heme iron, new 5-GC, nitrosamines, products of oxidation, saturated fat, and cholesterol. And, all of which are associated with increased risk of a variety of chronic diseases. So how much meat is safe to eat? So how much meat are they actually eating in Paleolithic diets? Well, typical recommendations are 30% of calories from protein. In a 2,000 calorie diet, that's 150 grams of protein. In a 2,800 calorie diet, it's 210 grams of protein. Assuming 80% of their protein comes from meat, that's 16 ounces of meat a day in a 2,000 calorie diet and 22 ounces of meat a day in a 2,800 calorie diet. So how much meat do Americans and probably Canadians eat? We probably eat about the same amount. Well, men eat about 4.8 ounces a day, women about 3.13 ounces or 90 grams a day. And the average is about 4 ounces of meat a day. In paleo diets, if we assume an average meat intake of 4 ounces per day, paleo followers would be consuming 4 to 5 times more meat than the average American. How much meat is actually safe to eat? Well, that question was posed to one of the most famous and revered nutritional epidemiologists in the world, and that was Walter Willett. And his answer was, if you step back and look at the data, the optimum amount of red meat you eat should be 0. So let's move on to compare plant-based versus low-carb diets. There is very clear, consistent evidence that whole plant foods are protective to health, that heavily processed foods, fast foods, and fried foods with added fat, sugar, and salt are damaging to health. Meat, especially processed meat and red meat, increases risk of disease. If you look at national and international dietary guidelines, here's what you'll see. This is, I'll just give you some examples. This is the World Health Organization's 12 steps to healthy eating. Step number 1, eat a nutritious diet based on a variety of foods originating mainly from plants rather than animals. Here's plates, pyramids, and planets by the planet by the FAO of the United Nations. And they were actually highlighting leaders in the world and their dietary guidelines, their public health dietary guidelines. In Germany, choose mainly plant-based foods. Brazil, eat foods mainly of plant origin. Qatar, emphasize a plant-based diet, including vegetables, fruits, whole grain cereals, legumes, nuts, and seeds. The UK, eat more plant-based foods, including at least 5 portions of fruits and vegetables a day. Cancer organizations, eat a healthy diet with an emphasis on plant foods from the American Cancer Society. Eat mostly foods of plant origin, the World Cancer Research Fund. Choose mainly plant foods such as vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and cut sugary drinks from the American Institute of Cancer Research. The Eat Lancet Commission, which was a group trying to present the very best sustainable diets for a healthier world. And in this commission, the sort of final comments were that we need to be eating healthy diets from sustainable food systems to safeguard our planet and improve the health of billions of people. And the universal reference diet would be to increase intake of healthy foods, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and legumes, and decrease consumption of unhealthy foods, red meat, sugar, and refined grains. And then, of course, Canada's new food guide. And if you look at Canada's new food guide, what you see is half the plate is fruits and vegetables, a quarter of the plate is whole grains, and a quarter of the plate is protein-rich foods. But in Canada's food guide, they tell us to be choosing protein foods that come from plants more often. And you'll also see make water your drink of choice. So you do see in here all sorts of foods. There's tofu and beans and nuts and seeds and chickpeas and lentils and all of those things. You also see some meat and poultry and dairy products, but with an emphasis on choosing the plant protein sources more often. I think the acid test is really to look at the longest lived, healthiest populations on the planet. And here we're talking about the people of the blue zones. And the blue zones are really places in the world where people live the longest, healthiest lives. And there are 5 blue zones. And there are certain common features in all blue zones. They have strong families. They don't tend not to smoke. They're socially engaged. They do constant moderate physical activity. And where diet is concerned, they all consume plant-based diets and they all consume legumes. This man is an Okinawan centenarian. And I think this is important. If you look at the average intakes in blue zones, you'll see 62% of their calories come from carbohydrates, 25% from fat, and 12% from protein. There's another group called the Semaine from Bolivia, South America, and I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but these people live a traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and they have the lowest reported rates of heart disease of any population. And their average intakes are 72% carbohydrates, 14% fat, and 14% protein. If we look at studies on longevity in low-carb diets, low-carb diets are consistently associated with increased mortality. In the ERIC cohort, over 15,000 individuals, all-cause mortality adjusted for age, race, and gender was compared to a reference intake of 50 to 55% carbohydrates. People that ate less than 30% of calories from carbohydrates, the risk of mortality increased by 58%. 30 to 40% of calories from carbohydrate, their increase of mortality increased by 32%. People that ate 40 to 50% of calories from carbohydrate, their risk increased 12%. At 55 to 65% of calories from carbohydrates, there were no differences between the 50 to 55% group. And in the over 65%, it increased by 15%, but only in those that were getting most of their carbohydrates from processed foods. If we look at plant-based versus animal-based foods, mortality increased 18% when carbohydrate was exchanged for animal-derived fat or protein, and mortality decreased 18% when the substitutions were plant-based. The bottom line is it makes little sense to promote diets that limit the most protective dietary components and maximize several pathogenic components when a more healthful and effective dietary protocol is available. And that is a whole food plant-based diet. And you know, the paleo founders actually concur. Boyd Eaton and Melvin Connor are the founding fathers of the current paleo diet. Much of the essential foundation of the movement is based on their research. They agree that 8 billion people can eat a meat-based diet without sacrificing the planet. Their advice is to eat less meat and get most of your protein from plants. So I want to wind up the presentation with a very brief overview of the good, the bad, and the ugly where low-carb diets are concerned. So let's look at the good. The good is that they eliminate refined carbohydrates, the starches like white flour products, and the sugars like sodas. They eliminate many highly processed foods. That's a good thing. The bad is that they're high in saturated fat and cholesterol. They're high in pro-oxidants and chemical contaminants. They're low in fiber, phytochemicals, and antioxidants. They have a lot of potential nutrition shortfalls, especially ketogenic diets. They tend to be low in potassium, magnesium, calcium, iodine, folate, vitamins A, C, and K. And the ugly is low-carb diets are high animal food diets. They're both ecologically unsustainable and ethically unjustifiable. They're ethically unsustainable. Low carbohydrate diets downplay the ecological crisis that makes eating lower on the food chain an ecological imperative. If we look at some of the studies, and there are many studies now, but this one from 2016 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences basically reported that by 2050, greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced by 29% if everyone followed the global dietary guidelines to eat more fruits and vegetables, eat less meat, sugar, and calories, and 70% if we all ate a vegan diet. Their recommendation, a global shift towards a plant-based diet. If we look at the land needed for omnivore versus plant-based diets, for a standard American diet, 2 football fields are 1.3 acres of food, or 1.3 acres of land could feed 1 person. On a plant-based diet, 2 football fields, 1.3 acres of land could feed 14 people per year. If you look at the carbon footprint of food, what you'll see is that beef has by far the highest carbon footprint, then lamb, followed by cheese, coffee beans, shrimp, pork, chicken, eggs, and then you have the plant foods. And you look at the difference this is the kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions per kilogram of food. Beef is 60 versus 0.3 for nuts and seeds, 0.4 for carrots, 0.9 for legumes. A huge difference. If our entire population ate a low-carb diet, our planet's dwindling resources would quickly run dry. If we all ate paleo, Dr. David Katz did the math on this, we would need an estimated 15 planet Earths to sustain our current population. And Jonathan Safran Foer, he wrote a book called We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast. And he said, changing how we eat will not be enough on its own to save the planet, but we cannot save the planet without changing how we eat. I think very low carb, especially ketogenic and paleo diets are also ethically unjustifiable. We are, as a species, slaughtering 80 billion land animals every year for food. Over 90% of them are raised in CAFOs, or confined animal feeding operations. Animal-centered diets hurt animals. It to me makes no sense to cause pain, suffering, and death in other living beings when it's not only unnecessary, but we're hurting ourselves and the planet in the process. Animal-based diets also breed human hunger. The greater our meat intake, the more resources we use and the fewer people we feed. If everyone ate a plant-based diet, the global calorie supply would increase by an estimated 50%, which could effectively wipe out hunger. The ultimate question is really this: how can humans best adapt to their current environment to sustain a growing population on a shrinking planet? By getting our nutrition from plants, we all win. And we have a choice when we consider the consequences of our food choices, not just for ourselves, but beyond ourselves. A plant-based diet really becomes both an ecological and an ethical imperative. And this is just some of the books I've written, and I will stop at that and take any questions that you might have. Oh, good, I can read that.
That was such an amazing, like a comprehensive talk summary on I think the best I've heard on the paleo and the ketogenic diet, Brenda. Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, like, we have few questions, but we want to go with the questions from our audience. First question is a lifelong ketogenic diet, is it sustainable?
Is it sustainable for an individual?
Yeah, I guess that's they're asking about themselves.
Yeah, definitely not very sustainable for the planet or for the, a lot of those kinds of things. But for an individual, a lifelong ketogenic diet, we actually have a lot of data looking at children that were raised on, because they had what we call refractive epilepsy, which means they weren't well treated with medications. They had to use a ketogenic diet in these cases. So we have a lot of studies that have followed those children to see what the health outcome would be of consuming this kind of diet long term. And I can tell you the results are not pretty. These children have a dramatically increased risk of death and dying and cardiovascular disease. They have very high blood lipids. They have very, very poor nutritional status. Their bone density is compromised. It's not a pretty picture. I would not recommend a ketogenic diet being used long term. I mean, in those cases, they didn't have a lot of choice, but most people have a choice.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you said it so beautifully, Brenda. And also in one of your presentations, I remember like earlier when you were doing this ketogenic or paleo presentation, you said like when you went to the gym, like at that time, like most people were on this diet, and like one of your gym members, like instructor, he was actually moving from keto or paleo diet to plant-based diet, like when he saw a lot of his friends.
Oh, you have such a good memory. So I will never forget that day, because I was horrified by what I was seeing. All the instructors were going keto, paleo, all of these, and I was just thinking the amount of meat they were eating. They would bring their lunches and you could just see these huge pieces of meat, and I thought, this is not a good thing. And this particular guy, he came to me after class one day and he said, I have to tell you this. He said, I went to, I've been going to these conferences he's a teacher of teachers. So he would do a lot of lectures at the fitness instructor conferences. And he said, a lot of the leaders who have gone keto paleo have actually developed cancers at very early ages. And he said, I've just been shocked. And he said, so a bunch of them, he said, they started reading this book. And he said, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called How Not to Die. And he said, it's saying that, we should be eating more plants and not so much meat and all. And I got such a kick out of it because, of course, this is Michael Greger's book. And I reviewed the book before it came out. I'm very, very engaged in a lot of what he was saying. And of course, we've done a lot of lectures together, traveled to Saudi Arabia together and all of those things. And so I was very, very familiar with that book. So I ended up I think I ended up getting a copy, assigned. I got a signed copy for him from Dr. Greger.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story, because yeah, it really tells a lot, because a lot of people, like even most of our students, participants, like who come to our workshop also, they wonder, oh, we hear so much about keto, and like some of them who have done keto, they say, I feel so good on keto diet. So like, why is that? If it's bad for me, why is that I'm feeling so good on keto diet?
You know what, you feel good because you're losing weight. And when you lose weight and you're inflamed, your inflammation comes down, you feel lighter. Weight loss, no matter what food you're eating, generally makes you feel better. So I think that's the biggest part of it. And so regardless of what diet you follow, when you lose weight, you tend to feel a lot better.
Like, thank you for answering that, because that, like, a lot of our participants have that question.
Yeah, so like, we notice that as well. Like in my practice, like I'm practicing as a surgeon and gastroenterologist in the hospital setting. I do see patients who come to me with the upset stomach, like dyspepsia, acid reflux, or gallstones. And when I start to take dietary history, the common expression that they use is, oh, recently I started eating healthy. Oh, this is recently they say I started eating healthy. That's a red flag. Okay, tell me about it. Because when patients say I started eating healthy, it doesn't tell us anything, right? So when I probe them, most like 80 to 90% of the time, they have recently switched to a ketogenic diet. They're eating more eggs, more cheese, more butter, more chicken. They're avoiding potatoes. They're avoiding like any beans and rice and pasta. There you have it. Like you have more acid reflux, more gallstones, like more upset stomach, more constipation.
And I think it's just so important to recognize that the other reason, I'm getting back to why they sometimes say they feel so much better, they're not eating processed foods as much. So whether it's a ketogenic diet or a paleo diet, I think the ketogenic diet will include more processed foods than a paleo diet really tries to eliminate processed foods. But even the keto diet, it eliminates, most processed foods are made with white flour, white sugar. It gets rid of all that stuff. And so that has a big impact too, when you're not eating processed foods. And that's why they're saying, oh, I'm eating a healthy diet, because they've eliminated the donuts and the ice cream and all of these very high carbohydrate processed foods. And I think that that is very telling. But it's what are you replacing that with? And so when you're replacing it with red meat, and you're replacing it with a lot of fat, red meat is a group 1, or processed red meat is a group 1 human carcinogen. Red meat is a group 2 or probable carcinogen. And so we need to recognize that those, even though you're feeling better, you're eating less processed foods, it's not necessarily a healthy diet. And so a healthy diet is a diet that is rich in fruits and vegetables, rich in high fiber plant foods like legumes and nuts and seeds and all of these wonderful foods that we pick from the ground. These are healthy foods.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There is one question here from Norm. He's actually from Kamloops. He's asking, with intermittent fasting, I understand that you burn up your glycogen reserves first. Then you switch to fat burning with only a small initial protein burn. His question is this protein burn significant before your body switches to fat?
It can be, but I think it goes for, about a day or two. And then you're switching over to fat. So you can lose some muscle, but it's not going to be huge. Your body really wants to conserve protein and lean mass as much as possible. So it's kind of like an emergency thing of trying to make, sugar. And once it gets to the point where it knows it's sort of threatening survival using too much muscle tissue or heart tissue or whatever protein tissue it's using, it knows it can't go beyond a certain point, and then it turns to. Now, Norm, do you like to do outdoor activities? My son is in Kamloops and he's so lonely. Only because of COVID, nobody's doing anything. Tell me, and I'll hook you guys up for a mountain climb.
So Norm and Judy, reach out to Brenda. Good, excellent. Yeah.
I'm kidding, but anyway, it made me think of Kamloops. My son's there.
So there is a question from Hope. She's asking how high our blood sugar can go after a high carb meal in a non-diabetic person. What are the normal fluctuations for glucose?
Well, you guys could probably answer that even better than I, but I would say we see normally blood sugar going, oh boy, my brain works in the US. 140 to 160, up to 200 maybe, but I need to convert that. You guys can convert it better than me. I do almost all my work in the States.
Yeah, so it's in the normal range, like after you eat under 2 hours, that in like Canadian numbers, you could even under 8 is considered normal.
Yeah. You could, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 8 to 10, like it can go up to 8 to 10 until like after 2 hours, and that's considered normal. Yeah. But if you're a non-diabetic, then it's not a worry. Like as long as you're sticking with whole foods that are plant-based, it's not just going with plant-based, but making sure that you're going with the whole foods. The problem is when you go with the processed plant foods, that's when you would see the blood sugar, the spikes are more higher. Yeah.
I just pulled up a table for quick conversion.
Okay.
Yeah, it's exactly. This is so important for people to realize, and not just, when we think of whole grains, for example, whole grains, there is a different levels of processing of whole grains even. And so if you're eating intact whole grains, like say oat groats, it has a different impact on your blood sugar than steel cut oats, which has a different impact than rolled oats, which has a different impact than ground oats. So as you sort of continue processing grains more and more and more, even if they're whole grains, the impact on your blood glucose will be quite a lot higher if they're more highly processed. So puffed grains, flaked grains, ground grains, made into muffins and breads and so forth, have a much greater impact than grains as they are picked off the plant, like kamut berries and oat groats and all of these rye berries and barley and so forth, which have a very much lower glycemic impact. Uh-oh.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we have one more question, which is more harmful, like eating processed food or eating animal-based food?
Oh, what a great question. I know what the animals would say for sure, but
sometimes the question, if I have to rephrase it, to me, it's like, should I hurt myself with a knife or a gun?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really tough question, but I'll tell you my own opinion is if your diet is rich in fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and nuts and seeds, I think you would do yourself more harm by adding processed foods than by adding small amounts of animal products. If you're just thinking about human health, because when we look at the blue zones, for example, none of the blue zones are entirely vegan. They all have small amounts of animal products. Some have a little bit of fish, some have a little bit of cheese, some have a little bit of, some sort of poultry or whatever. There are some meat in all of these places, but the diet is 90 or 95% plants. It's a very small amount of animal products. Consistently in these long-lived regions, they don't use processed foods. It's predominantly unprocessed foods. So that's why I would say probably, and again, I've done research in the Marshall Islands, and people for years lived on sort of fish and plants, and they did very well. Now they eat mostly processed foods, and they're not doing so well anymore. They have among the highest rates of diabetes in the world. And so I think, when you think about processed foods, there's some foods that are minimally processed. So you chop them, you put them in, the salad in a bag, you freeze your peas, whatever. Those foods are not a problem. It's the highly or ultra processed foods that are the problem. And these foods are the foods that we extract starch or sugar or fat. We basically, usually it's starch or sugar. We extract, and you've removed the fiber and the phytochemicals and the antioxidants and the vitamins and the minerals and all of that. You've got pure sugar, pure starch, and then you add fat and sugar and salt and additives and preservatives, and then you make it into some sort of puffy cereal or some sort of snack food. And not only have you taken out almost everything of value to human health to make the product, but you've added a bunch of what we know can be damaging to human health. And so this is just bad news all around, and we eat far too many of these highly or ultra processed foods. These foods are really bad news.
And that adds like an additional challenge, Brenda, these days with so many ultra processed plant-based foods like showing up, right? Every time we go shopping these days, there are more and more plant-based processed foods. And just a few years ago, plant-based was so healthy because making things from scratch. But now the plant-based world, there is an additional challenge of figuring out, are you eating a minimally processed plant food versus an ultra processed plant food?
Yeah, and this is really interesting because I have a bit of mixed feelings there. Like, I love the fact that people can, if can get almost anything plant-based. And so they're less inclined to want to eat the animal products, which I think is wonderful for the planet and for animals. But we do have to be really conscious that you can buy almost any version of, whether it's ice cream or some snack food. You can buy almost anything in a vegan version or a plant-based version. Now, to me, there are some processed plant foods that are really good additions to a plant-based diet. For example, these plant-based or non-dairy milks that are fortified. So when you have a whole food plant-based diet and you add some unsweetened soy milk or unsweetened almond milk or something like that, you get an extra 300 milligrams of calcium per cup. You get some vitamin D, you get some B12, and this can help to make it easier, especially for families, to get an adequate diet. And you can buy things like plant-based nut cheeses that are prepared in a similar way to dairy cheeses. They're fermented and they have all of the probiotics and so forth, non-dairy yogurts and so forth that are unsweetened as opposed to the ones full of sugar. Some of even the veggie meats can make it easier to be vegetarian. So when you're going, your kids are going out with the scouts or the Girl Guides or whatever, and everybody's doing a hot dog, they could have a tofu hot dog along with, or a burger if everybody's doing burgers. And there are degrees of sort of processing even within those categories. So some plant-based burgers are relatively unprocessed. So they have added salt and such, but they're made with, chickpeas and vegetables and so forth. Whereas some are made from isolated proteins and they are more heavily processed. But even those are better than the meat they're replacing, in my view. And they're better for many reasons. They don't produce TMAO. They don't come with the very pro-inflammatory new 5GC. There are a lot of, there's, less saturated fat, less cholesterol, there's no cholesterol. There's, all of those things that make them a better choice. In my view, they shouldn't necessarily be a part of your daily diet, but they can allow a little flexibility when you're going out, or when I made some of these sausages when my son-in-law's parents came from Bulgaria. They live on meat and cheese. They can't speak a word of English. They were coming over. I did a barbecue, lots of salads and beautiful foods, but I made some sausages. I don't think they knew they weren't meat sausages. I'm sure they thought they were just meat. And it was just nice to be, I had tofu, I had all of those other things, but something that felt very comfortable for them. And so sometimes there is a good reason, that they can be helpful food. So I don't like to say, oh, you should never, ever use these, because they can make life a little more flexible, enjoyable, whatever, but they really shouldn't predominate in the diet. They should be more the occasional foods, except for the plant-based milks and yogurts and such, which I think definitely can be a part of the daily diet and be very healthy additions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brenda. Yes, that was an excellent answer. So some of our viewers are asking, what do you eat on a daily basis? Like, would you?
Oh, I'm happy. I'm very happy to share that. So my breakfast. So I'm pretty much stick to a 3-meal a day without snacks, but I'm not the kind of person that's rigid. So if my belly is saying I'm starving, I'll have something to eat. But I find generally that my 3 meals keep me very satisfied from one meal to the next. So my breakfast, and I'm sorry, my food, I spend a lot of time cooking, and my food is going to sound a little bit complicated, but once you get doing it, I have techniques where I sort of batch cook. And so I don't have to prepare when I do my breakfast. So I cook kamut berries, barley, oat groats, so these whole grains with some lentils with them, because I like to get the lentils in with that. And you don't really, it's interesting, that's sort of the base of my breakfast bowl. You don't really taste or notice the lentils much there. But so that's the base of my bowl. And then I always add in a lot of fruit. So berries, pears, whatever the season. If it's peach season, it's peaches. And I'll have 3 or 4 different fruits in my breakfast bowl. And then I always like something creamy in it. So I will have a chia pudding that I make, homemade chia pudding, or some non-dairy like cashew almond yogurt that's unsweetened, or something creamy like that. And then on top, I make a dehydrated granola because I like something crunchy. And I always have a lot of seeds. So I keep a jar of seed mix in my freezer that's chia, hemp, flax, pumpkin, chopped up Brazil nuts. And that gets sprinkled on top as well. And I eat it with some sort of unsweetened non-dairy milk. And I have a big bowl and I love it. I just love that breakfast. It's so good. And then and I forgot to tell you, I always cook blueberries or Italian prune plums, which go on top too. I just love. And I just cook them with a tiny bit of water. And then I put a tiny bit of cornstarch or some arrowroot starch or something. I only need about a teaspoon for a whole big pot of blueberries. And it gives it a little bit of a kind of a sauce. So that's my breakfast. And then my lunch is always a giant salad. So I make a big bowl to last 3 or 4 days of salad with every color of the rainbow of things inside. I want something purple, blue, something red, something yellow, something orange. And so I have a big number of veggies and some sort of sprouts usually as well. And then on that salad, because if you eat even a big giant salad, it's not that filling. So for me to make it a full meal, I always have a starch. So it could be, some cubed butternut squash or some quinoa or something like that. And then I always have some protein. And so it could be little cubes of tofu or lentils or chickpeas or kidney beans or some sort of protein. And then I have some seeds, pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, something like that. And then I make a dressing that is usually a tahini lemon dressing to put on top. And I always put hemp seeds in the dressing too, just to increase the nutritional value. And I always have an orange with that meal, after that meal for dessert. Sometimes I even treat myself to a treat, like I make little cookies or little chocolate treats. They don't have any added sugars or oils or anything, but sometimes I'll have something like that too. And then dinner is usually a cooked meal, especially in the winter time. And so, for example, last night it was a fava bean stew kind of thing, and we made quinoa with it, and then lots of veggies. So usually I do at least 2 veggies, like I might do Brussels sprouts and then some other colored vegetable, like carrots or something like that. So that's my 3 meals, and I do sometimes have a little bit of dessert, but often it's just cut up apples or pears with some cinnamon on top, maybe a little nut butter to dip. That's a very typical dessert for us. So that's how I eat. I eat a lot of leafy greens, and I almost feel like a meal isn't a meal without leafy greens.
Amazing. Yeah. We want to come visit you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'd be so happy.
Yeah. So we want to wrap this up.
Yes.
Yeah. Before.
So we have just one last question before wrapping up. If I'm type 2 diabetes and I'm on whole food plant-based diet, what would you recommend? Like sometimes my sugars go up, like even though like I'm eating plant-based. So should I be avoiding starchy vegetables, or what would your recommendation be?
I would suggest to be eating, again, as whole foods as you can. So keeping the processed foods down, but I would also recommend eating more of your starchy foods earlier in the day. So have your grains at breakfast, maybe a little bit of a starchy vegetable with your big salad at lunch or with your soup, a little bit. And then at dinner, focus more on beans and non-starchy vegetables. And because generally as you go on during the day towards the evening, you become a little more insulin resistant. So in the evening, if you can keep your dinner a little lighter, I would say try not to eat between meals. Moderate your portions of the more concentrated starches like the grains and starchy vegetables. Really focus on beans and greens and have some nuts and seeds. Be very careful about the amount of fat you add to your food because it can make you more insulin resistant as well. Don't overeat. Keep your meals very moderate and stick to whole foods as much as possible.
Thank you so much, Brenda.
You're so welcome.
Yeah. So we want to wrap this up with an inspiring video of you. We hope you don't mind us sharing.
Not at all.
Viewers, we have shared that Brenda is a grandmother of 2 and she is in her 60s. But we are so amazed and inspired with your flexibility and your strength.
Okay.
So to our viewers, we want to share a video of you that you shared at the Real Truth about health conference. Yeah. Okay. We're sharing our screen.
That's fun.
Oh, sound share. Okay, let me share the sound as well. Share sound. Optimize the video. Start. We couldn't start.
So I'm going to start with doing the little bit of the flexibility and balance piece. And flexibility wise, I've always been relatively flexible, so I'll just show you that. And that feels really good, by the way. And I can do that. So I have to tell you, my push-up skills have reduced slightly because I tore my rotator cuff, and I'm still building back up. So I'm not sure how many I can do, but I'll see what I can do. Give it a go anyway. Stop at 50.
Stop.
So now I'm going to just do a little jump rope for you. It's one of the things that I actually, to be honest, don't do it that often. I should do it more often, but it's one of those tools you can bring with you anywhere, and you can get a workout in 15 minutes of good jump rope. And so I'm just going to give you a little demonstration, because normally what I do in my routine is 500 of these, and then 500 double unders. So, but not 500, every 10th one is a double under. So the whole point of this is really one of the things that people often say about vegans is they lose muscle, they're not as strong, they're not as fast. And in my experience, it's not true. I don't think I've lost much muscle since I was 30. I'm just as strong, I'm just as fast, and I'm more flexible than I'm at least as flexible as I was when I was 30. So vegan can support excellent health. Being vegan can support excellent health and can support optimal fitness at every stage of the life cycle. Oh, thanks for that. That was a fun surprise. Yeah, I mean, for me, fitness has always been so important because it makes me feel good, but also because of what people often say, oh, you're going to lose all your muscle, you can do this, this, this. And what I found is that, you know, I'm 63 years old now, and I don't take any medications. I don't, you know, I can do everything I did 30 years ago. I can run just as fast. I'm just as strong. and I think that's one of the wonderful consequences of consuming a plant-based diet is it supports, you don't end up developing cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, high blood pressure, all if you're eating a good diet. But exercise is a huge, important part of health. We need to get enough sleep. We need to get out in the fresh air and sunshine. We need to exercise. All of those things are components of health. It's not all about eating. So eating's extremely important, but there are other things in our lifestyles that matter too.
So well said, Brenda. Yes.
Beautiful. Well, Brenda, it's such a treat to have you on the Gift of Health Wellness Chat. Thank you so much for sparing all this time to be with us, answer all the questions. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for all that you're doing to educate people everywhere. And I'm so happy that you are fellow Canadians. We're building a bigger team all the time. So thank you for what you do. Thanks for having me.